Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, today we'll be starting a new chapter or a new bab, and that is what's known as awqatun nahi. Some people say the times where salah is disliked to be performed in. I touched on them before, however, we'll go over them again. So there's certain timings during the day where it's not permissible to perform salah, and that's to do with your nafil salah or anything extra, even when it comes to your uh, nafil salah, sunnah salah, making up any salah. The only exception if it's the salah which is for that current time. And if you notice, all three of these times, you find that they are at the beginning, as soon as they pass another salah or the time for another salah begins. So the first is when the sun is rising, okay? Call it tulu' al-shams. So here, while the sun is rising, as we know, before the sun rises, a person reads Salatul Fajr. A person is not allowed to read any salah whilst the sun is rising. No nafil, nothing. The only exception is the Fajr of that day. So let's say it's the first of Dhul Hijjah. The person is reading Fajr on that day and he's woken up late, and sun rises at 6 o'clock and he starts his salah at 5:59. And by the time he finishes, it will be 6:05. That's the only exception. Otherwise, as the sun is rising, you're not allowed to read any salah. And that continues all the way up to the sun has having risen fully. They say enough for a spear. So if you had to put a spear on the ground, for example, and the sun had to rise above that spear, i.e., roughly about 10 minutes. Okay? So as the sun is rising, there's no nafil a person can read, or no salah that they can be catching up. Number two is when is at noon, when the sun is in the middle, the highest part in the sky. At noon, a person is not allowed to read any salah, okay, until the zawal has occurred. Zala means to move or to remove. So until the sun has moved from its position in the middle of the sky, and that usually takes a few minutes. But at noon, person is not supposed to be reading any salah. Number three, at sunset, okay, ghurub shams, a person is not allowed to be performing any salah, voluntary salah, extra salah, nothing. The only exception, similar to Salatul Fajr, is Asr of that day. So let's say sunset is at 5 o'clock and you haven't read Asr, and you remember at 4:58 and you start your Asr. That's the only exception, okay, that you're allowed to perform your salah at that point. Then they go on to tell you that when it comes to this time here, okay, if you look at sunrise is connected to Fajr Salah. So after a person has finished Fajr Salah, he's not allowed to read any nafil, any voluntary salah. So let's say even if sunrise is at 6 o'clock and you finished Fajr at 5:15 and you've got 45 minutes, you can't say today I want to read extra nafil. It's not allowed until the sun rises and it's risen such that roughly 10 minutes have passed. Similarly, Salatul Asr, let's say sunset is at 7 p.m. and you finished your Asr at 5 p.m., you cannot read any nafil. It's disliked, and some say it's majorly disliked to read any nafil until the sun has set fully. Okay? And then they speak about making up. In fact, that will come later on. But when it comes to nawafil, or that salah which is not compulsory, so i.e. sunnah, first they give you the different raka'at, and then after that they tell you, are you supposed to make them up or not? So they say that, and just one more thing before that. Here, we spoke about at the actual time of sunrise, no salah. At the actual noon, no salah. At the actual time of sunset, no salah. Okay, that was one thing we spoke about. The second thing we spoke about is after Salatul Fajr. Okay, you're not supposed to be reading anything until the sun rises. After Salatul Asr, you're not supposed to be reading anything voluntary until the sun sets. Some people allow, even if you've missed a Salah and you remember. Okay, so let's say you read your Asr at 5 o'clock, and after that you remember that, oh, I forgot to read Fajr for today. Then even after you've read your Asr, you can read your Qada of Fajr. So they allow that which is compulsory. Thereafter, they move on to Nawafil, okay? Let's call it Nawafil, but it's the Salah which is not compulsory. It could be Sunnah, could be Nafil, etc. There's a hadith where the Messenger ﷺ says, whoever reads 12 rak'at voluntary Salah, then Allah builds for him a house in Jannah. So the ulama have tried to mention which are these 12. Everybody agrees that 2 rak'at before Fajr is voluntary and it's sunnah mu'akkada. It's highly, highly, highly encouraged. Okay. So there's 2 before Fajr, and then you've got the 2 compulsory of Fajr. And then when it comes to Dhuhr, in the Hanafi madhab, they tell you 4 before the actual Dhuhr and 2 after. Okay. And then Asr, they tell you that some people tell you that these are all mu'akkada. Mu'akkada means highly encouraged. And then there's ghayr mu'akkada, which means not so much emphasis on it, but it's good if a person reads it. So Asr, they say there's 4 which are ghayr mu'akkada before the actual Asr. Okay. Then Maghrib, they tell you there's 2 after Maghrib. And then Isha, they tell you before Isha, there's 4 which are ghayr mu'akkada. And after Isha, they say there's 4 or 2. Okay, they say whichever one you want to read. Even Asr, before Asr, they say you can read 4 or 2. Now, if you want to count 12 raka'at mentioned in the hadith, you start here. It's 2 of Fajr. It's 2. Okay. And then here you've got Dhuhr. Okay. I'll leave that for now. After that Asr, so Maghrib. Okay, you've got 2 definitely. It's 4. And then Isha. After that, you've got 2. Okay. So far, you've got 2, 4, 6. And then they count these for Dhuhr, 4 before and 2 after. So if you want to know which ones are mu'akkada, these are the ones. 2 before Fajr. And 2 before Fajr have even more emphasis. They have a lot of emphasis. Some even say up to the state of wajib. And then they tell you that there's no qada in the Hanafi madhab for these voluntary salahs that you missed. The only exception is the 2 before Fajr. In case you missed it, you can make qada of those 2 for the same day. So let's say today you missed it. Okay. They say you make on the same day, not one day after, a few days after. And it must be before Dhuhr. Okay, so there's 2 conditions. It must be number 1, the same day. And number 2 is before Dhuhr. Okay. As for the other nawafil that we just mentioned, they say that there's no qada for them. Okay. And they have a few debates as to how to perform these salawat. Do you read them 2, 2, 2, or can you read 4 one time? Generally, in the Hanafi madhab, wherever there's a 4 voluntary, you can read 4 voluntary in one go, meaning like you reading Dhuhr, for example, with 1 salam. The other madhahib tell you that you must read 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. You mustn't read 4 together. Okay? Then they go on to a mas'ala, which is to do with nawafil. They say that if a person starts off nafil, okay, you started off that which was voluntary, and then you had to break that nafil, or you're forced to break it, then now it becomes, some say up to the state of compulsory. It becomes compulsory for him to complete it. So before you started that voluntary prayer, it wasn't compulsory upon you. But the fact that you started, then you must finish it. And in the Hanafi madhab, similar to when it comes to a voluntary fast. If you start a voluntary fast, you must finish it now. And if you break it, then you make qada of it. And similar to Hajj, everybody agrees Hajj and Umrah. But if you start a voluntary Hajj or voluntary Umrah, then now it becomes compulsory. You can't say, I've seen too many people, now I want to go back. Okay, and they use the verse where Allah says, Al-Hajju Ashhurum Ma'lumat. And they move on to another mas'ala, which comes, or which is speaking about performing nafil salah or sunnah salah whilst seated without an excuse. Generally, it's permissible to read any nafil salah while sitting, even if you're able to stand. And they mention that a person will get half the reward. Okay, why? Because they're sitting without an excuse. Some make an exception for the 2 rak'at of Salatul Fajr. Why? Because they say that those are more than sunnah. Those, some argue it to be wujub. So they say that even if he's riding, for example, he must stop and read them standing. So this is speaking about a person who has no excuse and he wants to read sunnah salah. He's allowed to read sitting, but it's better for him to stand if he is able to. And then they touch on reading any nafil salah. They mention while a person's riding. So in the olden days, people used to travel by animal and they used to be riding. So let's say you're on a horse or a camel for so many hours and you could be facing any direction. They say that nafil salah, if they wanted to read, they were allowed to read whilst they were on the animal, facing whichever direction the animal was facing. So even if the animal wasn't facing Qibla, some say if you want to start, face your head towards Qibla and start, then you can read any nafil. So that would be similar. For example, if a person is in an aeroplane and they want to read nafil salah, any the salah that's not compulsory, whichever way the aeroplane is facing, they can sit in their seat, because as we mentioned, nafil, you don't have to be reading standing. They can be sitting in their seat, start the salah, and they can read, similar to if a person is, let's say, a passenger in the car, etc. They can do that. As for the compulsory salah, wherever a person is able to face the qibla or they need to find the qibla, they must look for it. So make sure you differentiate between those two. Now, there's a few smaller masail which they mention in nawafil, but these are the main ones. You know which salah is not compulsory, and then some of the masail when it comes to